I think placement inclusion is all about accessibility. So making sure that when you have a placement in place, you have to make sure it's accessible.
Is more focused on including a lot of different groups, and especially disadvantaged and marginalised groups. This includes like students from low socioeconomic areas, international students, rural remote students, and also students with like caregiving responsibilities.
So unfortunately, sometimes students do encounter racism, discrimination, microaggressions on their placement, and we wanted to look at some solutions for making placements more inclusive.
Inclusion, to me, it's important because starting at a new job or going to a new place is already daunting enough. I'm come from an Indigenous background, so if you go to a new place and there's racism towards Aboriginal people, you're going to even be more daunted. You're not going to want to go back. And I think that's important for a range of people because we live in such a diverse, multicultural society. Like, this is Australia. So I think showing support and inclusion of, everyone, culture, and then I guess any needs they might have as well, is very important.
To all the different types of students you might have. You might have mature students, you might have students with disabilities, and when you have things like that, you need to consider that when you're putting the student on placement, and oftentimes there's not even like a spot to put that in.
In our co-design workshops about placement inclusion with students and educators from across Australia, we came up with 20 solutions around placement inclusion.
When it comes to inclusion, it's just making sure that if you want the student to do this mandatory placement, that there's supports in place and there's resources in place to make sure that they can succeed.
Things like disability inclusion, so making sure that the placement sites are welcoming of students with disability, are welcoming of neurodiverse students, are welcoming of queer students. There's more that can be done.
I would include more transparency about what's expected of students so that students are never turn up for placement unaware of what's expected of them. They know exactly what their uniform's going to be, what they're going to have to do, and also do they need to be the ones to communicate their needs, or should the university communicate those? There's a lot of gaps in communication there that mean that students with disabilities often fall between the gaps and they get lost, and because of that they fall behind.
Definitely more flexibility in terms of placement, and also more of a consideration to individuals, and especially those I mentioned before, like international students, students with caregiving responsibilities and things like that.
I feel like workplaces, so supervisors at workplaces or workplaces in general, should, I guess, make it known that they're inclusive. I know there's this idea of in the document of a third-party stamp saying yes, we support inclusivity in our workplace, but I think that tokenistic approach needs to be taken further and have workplaces actively showing this support.
I understand where they're coming from because maybe they experienced that in the past, but I think times have changed, and we should also recognize that maybe those past processes also weren't a good thing. Just because it happened in the past does not necessarily mean that we should continue doing it in the future, especially if it didn't really have any good outcomes.